Now, if you ask me, at what stage would you put 100% into gold? I have to say I'd be tempted, or I'm always tempted to do just that.
They now have to keep printing or we crash.
We've got this ticking time bomb.
Talking gold with the one and only Andrew Maguire.
Welcome to Live from the Vault.
Hey, my name is Shane Moran, and I'll be your host for this week's episode of Live from the Vault, the show that goes beyond the headlines and uncovers the truth about the precious metals industry and the effects on the global economy in these historic times, with exclusive access to experts and insiders, and they reveal information and insights you simply won't find anywhere else. Now, this week, we have the one and only Andrew Maguire, precious metals expert and whistleblower in the house, and to help him pull back the curtain, we'll be joined by popular demand from the Live from the Vault community industry expert, Marc Faber. That's right, Dr. Doom is in the house, and you're not going to want to miss this conversation. So just before we get started here, please help keep spreading the word about our channel by hitting that like button, sharing and subscribing, and click on the bell if you'd like to be notified in real time as each episode goes live. Now, for our newer community members who have not met Marc Faber, let me tell you just a little bit about him. Marc is known as Dr. Doom. He is a Swiss investor based in Thailand, and he's the publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom newsletter. Now, we're going to leave a link to that newsletter in the description below. Make sure you check it out. And he's the director of Marc Faber Limited, which acts as an investment advisor and fund manager. And Marc also serves as director advisor, shareholder of a number of investment funds that focus on emerging and frontier markets. And with that, let's head over to the UK and talking gold with the one and only Andrew Maguire and our special guest, Marc Faber. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us again. Obviously, we had you, goodness me, I can't believe it, maybe a couple of years now. But thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to have you come and join us today.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share some of my views.
Greatly look forward to it. I've had so many questions. And I think, obviously, Mark, I don't know anyone that's been talking about gold and silver and precious metals longer than you. Really, you so, and I think, a lot of people have probably been weaned onto the subject of it by you, who've come from, we tend to deal with a very small group who are gold, silver, everyone understands it. But I think you cast that net out a bit wider than we can, because you actually you're such an economic guru, and obviously people come to you for more things than just gold. But so really appreciate you actually coming to give us your insights, and maybe to get some economic questions which all you integrate. And what's really interesting me at the moment, Mark, and there's so many things. Where do you see, I guess the first question is, where do you see inflation and where do you see it going?
Well, in your introduction, Shane pointed out that your channel is looking for the truth. It's a very difficult notion, the truth, and philosophers have discussed what is actually true and what is not true for ages, so I'm not 100% sure that I would know what inflation will be and has been and so forth. I can only say this. Basically, when you have central banks and governments that can pile up deficits and print money, it is clear that somewhere in the system, we don't know where, but somewhere in the system, prices will go up. Now, these price increases can be in stocks, they can be in bond prices, they can be in commodity prices. They are most of the time somewhere in real estate prices, but irregularly. and they can be in consumer prices. And within consumer prices, some people eat meat and some people eat vegetables. So it could be that the meat prices go up, but not vegetable prices, and it could be the opposite. And some people have children that go to school and need to pay school fees, and some people need insurance policies, and so forth and so on. So your inflation may be quite different from my inflation. You live in a different jurisdiction than I do, and we have different governments, and our countries are different in terms of the industrial goods and agricultural products we produce. So we may have different inflation. But in general, to answer your question, we have had a period of disinflation beginning in 1980-81, which was accompanied by a period of declining interest rates. This period should have probably come to an end around 2016, 2017. But central banks kept interest rates artificially low. For what reason, we don't know with certainty, but I suppose they wanted to keep interest rates low in the belief that this would be favorable for the economy, or favorable for some people in the economy that happen to be friends of theirs. You understand? The central banker, he comes out of Wall Street most of the time. He doesn't come out of the class of peasants and farmers and workers. They all come out of the financial service industry. And so it is likely that their policies will be favorable to their friends and not to the overall society. But this is the way it is. And I'm just mentioning this because the policy that we have pursued in the Western world in the last 30, 40 years have been favorable for some people, but not particularly favorable for others. Certainly not for the working class. I'm not wanting to express here the thought that I'm a socialist. Not at all. I'm a capitalist. But unfortunately, some people have kind of destroyed the capitalistic system and the free markets by intervening with monetary measures and also fiscal measures to their advantage. Well understood. So anyway, to put it in a perspective, now in the last few years, the rate of inflation has gone up. By inflation here, I mean the rate of consumer price inflation, and it then breaks down into prices for goods and services. Now, the Federal Reserve and the other central banks, first they denied that this was a trend. They said it's temporary, because they're all liars. You have to understand this. I want to make very clear in this broadcast. Central bankers, like lawyers, are born to lie. They have to defend their own interests and are not interested in the lives of the simple people on the street. So they claimed that this bout of price increases was temporary. Then they claimed it's all Putin. Then they claimed it's China. And then they claimed it's Iranian. But it's never their own fault. It's always someone else's fault. And basically, we had this strong bout of inflation. Interesting is that in Europe, the consumer price inflation was actually higher than in the US, but it's understandable in the context of the European dummies, because they are the poodles of the United States. They listen to what the US does and what the US commands them to do. These dummies at the central bank in Europe, including the latest one, Miss Lagarde, they kept interest rates negative. You have to understand this. Never in history that has been recorded from 5000 BC up to today did we have negative interest rates. But our central banks in the Western world managed to implement negative rates in nominal terms and anyway in real terms. So this distorted the financial system very badly because it allowed companies, zombie companies, as you may say, to live because they never had to repay any capital and pay interest on their capital. They could raise money free of charge, essentially. So that created this bubble we had in the last few years in meme stocks and SPACs. And now we have another bubble in AI, artificial intelligence. Well, I'm glad there is artificial intelligence because maybe this artificial intelligence will replace the dumb bureaucrats that we have in Europe, especially in Germany, and the dumb communist, socialist bureaucrats that we have in the US. So maybe AI will be a big thing by replacing these incompetent bureaucrats. But what I want to say is that the inflation in consumer goods and in services has begun. Now, I want you to remember, because probably you would remember, in the 70s, already in 73, 74, the rate of inflation was over 6-7%, but the prime rate went to over 12%. And now we have an inflation rate, both in Europe, in the US, depending on the household, but let's say around 5-6-7%, maybe higher if you have children that go to school and you have to pay the school fees for useless teachers, but better than the ones that are under the teachers' union. But still, you have to pay for that. And so the inflation is somewhere around 6 to, 8% per annum, depending on the household. And the Fed fund rate is still at 5%, having been essentially very low until just 18 months ago. So in real terms, say if inflation is 6% and interest rates are still at 5%, and the 10-year bond in America is below 4%, the 10 years treasury. In 1973, it went to over 10% already. Now it's at less than 4%. I call that interest rates that actually will make inflation a very enduring and sticky proposition. I don't think inflation will come down in the next 6 months. Then central banks will say, hurrah! Thanks to us, we brought the rate of inflation down. First, they said it's because of Putin, it's because of whatever. But now that inflation will come down somewhat, they will say it's us in our intelligent battle against inflation. Anyway, but afterwards, in my view, inflation will accelerate, and it has to, because you look at the recent debt deal. The recent debt deal will increase the government debt by $4 trillion in 2 years. If it's not financed by taxation, but it increases the debt, in other words, it's a deficit. A deficit is inflationary in any instance, because it increases the spending more than the tax revenues that would support the spending. So my view is, if we talk about inflation, the picture doesn't look good. And in history, every messed up regime, messed up government has always found the creation of inflation to be the easier option than the curtailment of entitlement programs. This was a big problem during the Roman Empire because the soldiers wanted more money and the Praetorian Guard wanted more money and the people of Rome, the citizens, wanted more money. So the emperor was always, if he doesn't fulfill the expectations of the legions, of the army, they chopped off his head. If he didn't fulfill the expectations of the Praetorian Guard in Rome, they chopped his head. That is the problem. I wished we could chop off the heads of some of the bureaucrats.
Here. I like that. But I think you've also drawn some really interesting parallels here because inflation is inequitable. And I've heard you talk about this before, where obviously now in this country, we have a 19% food inflation rate. 19% as of recorded as of now.
Yes, in the UK.
That is, and obviously I've heard you, I think what's interesting here is, Mark, I've heard you talk about this before. When you're wealthy, it doesn't bother you. But how it affects the masses is so interesting.
It's horrible for poor people. I mean, like I live in Thailand, my food inflation has been low because I live mostly from cigarettes and beer. The beer price hasn't gone up in 3 years. It went up a lot before that. And it will go up again under the new government because the old government we had, the military government, was always accused of doing nothing. Well, I said to all my friends, thanks God it didn't do anything because whatever the other governments did was a mess. And in Thailand, we had a government that didn't interfere much into the economy. And so Thailand survived relatively well with relatively low inflation.
Yeah.
The worst part is this incompetent people who run the government. They always think they know better. You understand? If they would admit, okay, I'm incompetent, I shut up and I go home and do as little damage as possible, that would be one thing. But you look at the German politicians, the Green Party, these horrible bureaucrats, everything they've done, they've made the conditions worse than they were if they hadn't done anything.
This is interesting. And I think, Mark, the other thing I was trying to, because there's so many things, I mean, we can only probably cover a fraction of them, but now we've seen the Fed talking about it. I mean, we're recording this just before the June FOMC decision. And I think there's a 70% chance or 65% chance that a 25 basis point is baked in. And who knows? We're talking about pause. But the thing is, I think one thing that gets me is that this stupid Fed has the rate that they have taken rates from 0 or below 0 to 5% or in excess of 5%. What is caused is, because they didn't stress test any of the banks, that what would happen when you do this? Well, what's happening in the banking industry as a result?
Do you think they know what the stress test is? Well, I wouldn't know how to carry out the stress test because it's quite complex and you need experts. But the big mistake is not to increase rates to the 5% where they are now. The big mistake happened under Mr. Bernanke first and then Miss Yellen at the Fed, who kept interest rates artificially low for far too long. And, I always say the tragedy is in private businesses. If someone is a failure, say he runs the company and runs the company into the ground, it is likely that he will not find a new job easily, except in the financial sector. But in general, someone who messes up something in a company, he will be kicked out and he will be penalized both by society and through essentially a loss of income. But at the Federal Reserve, Miss Yellen, before becoming Fed chairman, she was responsible for the Federal Reserve of San Francisco, which was responsible for California and Nevada and Arizona, where the biggest real estate bubbles occurred. You have to see this. And she then is promoted to Fed chairwoman. It's unbelievable. You reward failures. Like Ursula von der Leyen was a completely useless defense secretary in Germany. What do? They promote her to run essentially the EU. Well, the EU is a disabled organization to start with, so to have a complete moron running it is maybe not that bad. But I'm just saying that somewhere in our society of democracies, we have mob rule, and the worst kind of people get pushed upstairs and finally run entire countries.
It's always puzzled me because I have an opinion on it, obviously, but the World Economic Forum, obviously we watch it in consternation, to be quite honest, in absolute consternation, because I think if one was to apply logic to the message they're trying to send here, then obviously I start to think, but when we see that translating to someone like Biden coming out and saying, build back better, and the same message, build back better everywhere around the world, what they're saying is, well, we have to first destroy something before we can build it back better. And is that to me is what's happening? Can it be, is this thought through, or is this just because they're just so, out of control?
Yes, I agree with you. It would be of benefit to the world if the WEF was destroyed, and at the same time we could destroy the World's Health Organization and the UN, and we could destroy the CIA and the FBI. This is a problem in the philosophy of states or political philosophy. How do you actually keep organizations within the system, within the line of duty, and not becoming overly powerful? And the problem nowadays, it seems that some organizations have become very powerful. And if you analyze really the WEF, the Economic Forum, which unfortunately is still being hosted in my country, in Switzerland.
Yes.
And my friends who have houses in Davos, by letting out their houses for 2 weeks during the World Economic Forum, they can pay for the maintenance of the house in Davos and the taxes for 1 year. It's a very good business. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. But the WEF forum, if you look at the people there, to a large extent, they make propaganda, or say they broadcast socialist views. But actually, just observing the WEF, it is a mixture of powerful business people and government officials. In other words, they work together, which is the characteristic of fascism. the melting of government and business power, of corporatism. So it's a very strange organization, and there are different views, but we can categorically state that it's not an organization that has anything to do with democracy. That, I think, every observer should know that. Had nothing to do with democracy, has everything to do with elitism and with melting of corporate and government power to dominate the world or dominate some countries.
Interesting that we then have this. I mean, we're talking about pretty much a NATO, the NATO world here. But this is what we're talking about. But the thing is what's interesting is that while we look at it through that prism, through the NATO prism, suddenly you move to what the 3.8 billion people that SCO, the Africa. Not a party to this game, not really buying this into this this mantra. So really, it's an interesting, because I think what are we, 1.8 billion on this side, and there's something like 3.8 billion that side. I mean, surely they must be worried a little bit, because since they weaponized the dollar against Russia, and China's now making steps to open up the land bridge to make sure they are sanctioning proof themselves. We see Miley talking about we're at war with we need to increase the Pentagon budget because we are technically at war with Russia, with China. I mean, this is crazy stuff, and so really, what are you seeing here? This is what we're seeing, and we're seeing China. Xi, when he was re-elected, came out and said, "I'm preparing my country and my citizens for war." What do you what can we make of this?
Well, again, I don't know. I mean, I'm blind about this because common sense would say there shouldn't be any war, that trade between Russia and Western Europe is very good economically, that trade between China and the US is excellent economically, and that the fact that China produces goods and installs infrastructure in Africa is very good, and so forth and so on. But the Western politicians, especially coming from the US, the neocons, and the media, you have to see the complicity of Western media, especially of the US. Everything is against China. Everything is against Putin. Everything is against Serbia and Djokovic. All these people are evil, and we in the Western world are the nice people. We want the best for the world. We're not looking after ourselves. We're looking after everybody. I mean, it's a complete joke. But only the media people could be so stupid to fall into this trap and defend the Western government's views as openly as they do. Because I know many journalists, and most of them are actually quite intelligent, but they're told from upstairs, you are going to say this. And that's what they do. But I have many friends, they believe war with China is inevitable, and that the first station is the war in Ukraine, and that they want to, that this is a war about Russia, and that they want to essentially eliminate Putin, and they don't know who's coming afterwards. They don't care. They don't have great foresight. They never thought who's coming after Saddam Hussein, who's coming after Gaddafi, and so forth. They don't care. They just want to destroy and disturb and create chaos. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is this, the Chinese and also the Russians have built alliances, or at least some sphere of interest that, as you pointed out, combines a large number of people in the world. Say, the Western Alliance, if we can call this, is essentially the US, and the close allies is the, how to describe him, the woke supreme in the north, Mr. Trudeau, and then the British people. I really can't believe that the independent British people would bow to the US, but that's what is happening at the present time. And then the Australians, they enslaved themselves. Hard to believe also, because they're free-loving people. But this has happened. And then the Europeans. But the rest of the world, Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, Russia, the former Soviet Union, China, Southeast Asia, and so forth, they are much more skeptical about the US. It became obvious to me just recently here in Thailand. Thailand has always had close relationships with the US and so forth. But in the recent elections, it became obvious that the US is intervening in favor of one party. And that upsets even simple Thais who, in general, are more concerned about the soccer results in Britain between Manchester City and Manchester United than about local politics. But for this involvement of the US in Thai politics, they really got annoyed. I wanted to say pissed off, but they got annoyed. And it surprised me somewhat. And so the US has lost a lot of credibility and goodwill. Say before, I think if you look back at the 50s until the Vietnam War, the US was highly regarded around the world. But this has given way to second thoughts.
Yeah, I think the more and more, but I don't know, it's not just my sphere of influence, but more and more people, other than outside of the narrative, the single narrative you're talking about, which is dictated. Outside of that, we see this terrible war, that as a proxy war between the US and Russia. It is that these poor Ukrainian people are being blitzed, murdered. I feel sorry for both sides, because this is another instance.
Both sides.
Yeah.
Both sides are butchering each other. I just wrote the report 2 weeks ago about the Battle of the Somme during World War One. It was a battle that didn't make any sense at all, where the British troops stormed the positions of the Germans. And within the first day of the battle, 57,000 people died. I mean, unbelievable. But look, generals and commanders are a special breed of people. But I have to say, so far, and it may change, but so far the Chinese have shown a lot of restraint. Mm-hmm. And then the US is suddenly surprised. The week ago, the defense secretary of the US, Austin, he wanted to meet the Chinese defense minister in Singapore because they have a conference there. The Chinese refused. They turned the offer down. But I can understand, because, if you're accused every day of doing something wrong, and the US imposes all sorts of sanctions. I mean, first of all, in today's world, sanctions don't work. The sanctions are only kind of work in the fantasy and the dreams of the childish bureaucrats that populate the US State Department. But if you look at how world trade works and how oil flows and so forth, it just doesn't work. And incidentally, I have a good story about this. I have a friend in Switzerland. He works for one of there are about 3 or 4 companies that make sophisticated amplifiers. These are amplifiers that are used in discotheques and in concert halls and in private homes of ultra well-to-do people. I don't have one of these amplifiers, by the way, because I'm not very musical. But one of these amplifiers costs between $500,000 and $1 million US, and they don't sell a lot. But they had an order for someone in Russia for such an amplifier. And then his company in Switzerland couldn't sell it to Russia, but his agent in New York told him, it's no problem. We buy it from you and we ship it to Russia. We can do it. I think it's a wonderful story.
I mean, yes, these sanctions, I mean, as you say, these sanctions, what gets me is that the blowback from these, I mean, is Europe stupid? I mean, are they stupid or is this part of their plan? Because clearly all it's done is benefit the US. You know, so suddenly my gas bill goes up to literally £400 a month from less than 100. But where's this gas coming from? Oh, it's coming on ships from America after they blow up the pipeline. I mean, this is just one example, but I mean, you know, clearly everything about this war, everything about the sanctions is purely to benefit the US. And I can't believe that everyone else has not. It's the press. I think most people realize, hang on, there's something going on. There's something smells here, but because of this single narrative, you just believe what you see on the first 3 lines of the top of the paper.
Yes, but I'd like to say is in Europe, people had, especially in Germany, a very good time until, say, 10 years ago. And the standards of living rose a lot. And they became complacent. And, ordinary people may not realize it, but all these measures are not beneficial to the US. They're beneficial to some people in the US and some people also in Europe. Some European politicians, that I'm sure, because I've known the history of the Socialist Party in Switzerland, they get paid under the table by someone. And if you look at the Soros Foundation, if they pay people in Eastern Europe and in Hong Kong to organize demonstrations and so forth, for sure, they also support some groups in Western Europe to undermine essentially the democracies, for sure. But I always think the Europeans will wake up. And I tell you when they will wake up, and this is when their stock markets will be down 50% from the highs. Because then the wealthy families will wake up and say to themselves, maybe it's better we don't spend the whole summer in Saint-Tropez and in Antibes.
So I guess, Marc, you know, I guess this comes to the point then, you know, with all this, as you say, doom, gloom, and it really is. But there's hope. And I think the hope is, to me, is that we are still at this point able to take personal responsibility for ourselves. And that brings me on to the only energy on this planet that is, I mean, money is energy. The only energy on this planet that really is debt-free and allows us to actually take personal responsibility for ourselves is what you've been talking about for decades. gold, silver, precious metals?
The governments want to actually prevent people from taking responsibility. You know, we've seen this with COVID, and not many countries forced people to have a vaccine, but they almost forced them by telling them, well, if you want to work for us, you need a vaccine, otherwise you can't work for us and we'll need to fire you and so forth and so on. So the whole social security, this has been discussed by economists like Thomas Sowell of Stanford. The social security in America was a disaster for the black families because the black families were a strong unit, but that was destroyed by social security that essentially pays single mothers and so forth and so on. But that aside, the personal responsibility is, of course, not affordable for everyone, because it not only entails holding gold, but it would entail holding, diversified portfolio of assets. So you would have some real estate and some stocks and some cash and some gold and silver and platinum. But you would have to also then diversify the jurisdiction. In other words, you would hold some gold, say, in Europe, but maybe some gold in Asia, and so forth and so on. So someone who is poor, he has more difficulties to implement this strategy. But in general, I would say you shouldn't trust government officials and you shouldn't trust central bankers to look after the store of value function of money. Because we know, and it's statistically proven, that the purchasing power of money has gone down a lot. I mean, if you look at the documents at what prices your grandparents bought their house or their apartment or condo, what it is worth today, you can say that money has lost its value. And it is quite possible that this loss of value will dramatically accelerate. That I want to state. If we look at the Roman Empire as a model, for the first, say, 300 years, the value of the dinar went down a little, but not much. But then it was like a watershed and waterfall, and it collapsed. So this could happen to the US dollar, and that would obviously propel assets such as gold, silver, platinum higher. Also, I suppose Bitcoin, but I feel more comfortable holding gold than Bitcoins, because it depends, you understand, the disadvantage of gold is, and maybe your company can offer an alternative, but basically if I'm in Thailand and I travel to Canada, I can't travel with 10 kilos of gold. They will arrest me.
No, not to Canada. I would not do that.
Yes. And so, if you live in Thailand, then you keep some gold in Thailand for an emergency. But you also have gold, say, in Singapore or in Europe, as I do. And but it's not the best investment, gold. I'm not saying that, but it's a safe investment. Provided, and this is a big question mark for precious metals holders, provided the government doesn't come in and expropriate you. That they can do. If they could lock you in, they can do anything.
We saw that in COVID, absolutely, and they certainly did. They abused everybody terribly, and again, it was again, this is WHO. It is a dictate from them. They're currently trying to instigate, even in this country, in other countries too, an overriding mandate where you sign up to them and they can tell you, they can override all of your country's decision making and say, if we decide that you will have a vaccine, if we decide you will do this or that or the other, you have to do it. I cannot believe that there are some countries that, I mean, we're obviously arguing about that in the UK now, because Brexit, obviously, an unelected body of European Union was rejected ultimately. Now we're talking about substituting that for an unelected body of an organization that has a very bad track record and that's being kind. So what do you think? I mean, has your country adopted this mandate?
My country, I don't know, because it's gradually becoming a socialist country. But I can tell you, in India and in Uganda, they're not going to sign it. And China is unlikely to sign it as well. And if they sign it, it couldn't care less to break the signature. So I actually, despite all the gloom and so forth, I have to say that in the last few years, say the WEF used to have a reasonably good reputation. Now, I think that among normal people, they have a very negative view about the intentions of the WEF. And equally, the WHO, I think ordinary people, they think that it's a mafia, a huge mafia that is actually dangerous to the health of ordinary people. And the same, the opinion of the US has gone down, the opinion of the CIA. I mean, nobody normal can believe that the CIA has any nice and good intentions. I mean, quite frankly, you would have to be a dreamer to believe that. So my sense is that actually we are a kind of a turning point where countries will become more nationalistic. Is of course a more dangerous world. But I think the popularity of WEF and WHO and so forth has peaked. People don't trust them anymore. They also, luckily, don't trust their own governments anymore. I mean, how can you trust the British government at the present time?
Impossible.
How can you trust Trudeau?
I think the hope here is we move from this unipolar world into a multipolar world where it actually makes sense. I think China's been very clever in the way they're pulling down barriers between enemies, between historic enemies, figuring it might be better to work together. Obviously nothing's perfect because there's still disputes within all of that organization. But on the other hand, is by taking down barriers to create trade, you're creating a multipolar world, and how that affects the unipolar hegemonic dollar is an interesting equation to me, because it's obviously no one knows, and quite honestly, we don't see the dollar evaporating overnight. But on the other hand, China, Russia, SGO, BRICS Plus, all are using currencies, hard currencies related to gold, commodities, ultimately, and with their own trading partners. So while they're trading non-dollar trades with their own trading partners, it must be impacting the rest of the world.
Yeah, no question about this. I mean, I just used the chart in a recent report. It shows the trade of the US and China with sub-Saharan Africa, okay? So in year 2000, the US trade with sub-Saharan Africa was twice as large as Chinese trade with sub-Saharan Africa. Now, Chinese trade with sub-Saharan Africa is 4 times larger than US trade. That is what pisses off the US, nothing else. They are just terribly upset that their trading world, like the Roman Empire was the whole Mediterranean and the surrounding countries of the Mediterranean. It was for those days a huge achievement because they didn't have airplanes and railroads and motor cars. Everything, the troops had to be moved by foot or horse. But nowadays we had basically in the Western world a trading empire, US, Europe, and the rest of the world, partly the old British Empire and so forth. These were secondary players. The center was really the US. And now another country is coming up, an entire empire with 4 times the population of the US, China. Another one waiting in the wings in the service industry, India. And suddenly the US is staying there and has to ask itself, how do we, let's say, react to this new reality? Do we let us push aside gradually, or do we fight? And the neocons, I'm telling you, this is the danger for the whole world. They want to fight. Because they grossly overestimate themselves.
Well, it's you know what, I think this has been marvelous. And I think there's one thing that I wanted to sort of maybe end on is a lot of people I speak to say, well, I'm a bit worried about stocks, a bit worried about this. And they've put their money because they can get 5% in a money market fund. So they pulling it out of the regional banks, the small banks, and creating problems in doing that, and don't realize that they, much like 2008, coming very close to being gated. At some point, you could gate these funds should there be a problem. And so I think what I was going to really leading to was, obviously it's dangerous. It's a trading decision to put cash in the bank as much as it's a trading decision to take any other decision. But and I know you specialize in multiple asset classes. But from a gold perspective, do you think that if one can, and obviously if one is in a position to do it, one should put a good, what sort of percentage of your assets would you suggest people put into physical gold in multiple jurisdictions? I mean, we have 15 vaults around the world for the reason that one should have diversity of jurisdiction. What percentage do you think gold and even silver, if that's all right, should people really think about putting into those assets?
Well, I mean, when I talk to stock people, they all say that my allocation to equities is too small because my allocation to equities is 25%. But then I tell them, well, I have also 25% in real estate and real estate related equities like REITs and so forth. And then when I talk to bond people, I say I have 25% in cash and bonds. They think it's too little and so forth. When I talk to gold, some of my gold bug friends, the truly hardcore gold holders like Eric Sprott or Tom Kaplan, I think they have most of their money in gold and gold assets. I mean, I have about 25% in gold. But it's quite a lot. I don't know. You see, I look at the world. Of course, I started out after studying and I had to make money. So I worked a lot and I still work a lot because I'm born under the Christian view. You were talking about we should have some hope. Christianity is a religion of hope, that the next life will be a better one, or that we all go to heaven. But in my view of the beliefs of Christianity, I think it is the duty of everyone to make a contribution to society. My contribution is essentially to work as long as I can, as long as God gives me the health that allows me to work. And number two, the productive part is to try, as you pointed out in your introduction, to come closer to the truth than what the government propaganda and the media mafia friends portray. So I try to do that, and but my ambition is not to become wealthier, it's just to keep more or less what I have. But I want to make one point very clear to the people that I meet at conferences. So many people always tell me, oh, I don't trust anything, I put all my money in the bank. Money in the bank is no longer safe the way it was when my grandmother put all her savings in the bank. Because the banks are no longer safe, and the monetary depreciation, or we can call it the monetary inflation, is very high. So you should have a diversification. I just suggested the stocks and some cash and bonds and some precious metals and real estate. It's not the ideal portfolio for performance, but it's relatively safe. Now, if you ask me, at what stage would you put 100% into gold? I have to say I'd be tempted, or I'm always tempted to do just that, because I can't see how stocks would perform well, because stocks are driven by money printing, and gold wouldn't do well. You understand? It was possible between 1980 because gold had overshot between 1970 and 1980 by traveling from $30 an ounce to $850 an ounce. So after a long period of correction came, where gold was trading between $250 and $450 for essentially 20 years until 1999, when it started to break out on the upside. But I've been always buying gold during that time, not because I'm smart, but because I'm patient.
Well, I think you've also described multiple things there, including wealth preservation as one aspect.
Yes, I think so.
And there's no point in, if you've got a hole in the bucket and you don't fix the hole in the bucket, what's the point of pouring more stuff into it? So absolutely,
yeah, sure.
It makes sense. But you know what? I'm going to make sure that we've got the link up. People should come and visit. You have two main services. Can you tell us about the two main services you have? And obviously, people should come and look, because what you're talking about here today, you're touching the surface of, it's about education. And if any one of us can make a slightly better decision based upon the information that we have, the good information we have, and it's about good information to make those decisions. So I would very much encourage people to come and visit your website. Can you please tell us a little bit about what you primarily offer there?
Well, basically, as you know, I started to work in 1970 in New York, and in 73 I moved to Hong Kong. Then I was at White Wealth. It was an investment bank formed by some people on the East Coast. How do you call them? Anyway, and then in 78, White Wealth merged with Merrill Lynch, and I didn't want to work for Merrill Lynch, so I joined Drexel Burnham Lambert and opened their offices in Hong Kong and Singapore. And then when they went out of business in 1990, I started my own business and stayed in Hong Kong until 2000, 2001. And then I still have an office in Hong Kong, but I live in Thailand because I traveled a lot until COVID hit, and now I travel less because traveling is less pleasant than it used to be. And I mean, for us, for you and me, this technology that we can talk to each other on the internet is that something unbelievable. And when you think of it, it essentially allows us to have a board meeting among people and in the same room, essentially. Mm-hmm. And it allows me, while we are talking, to drink and to smoke. When in a board meeting room in Canada, they would arrest me if I smoked.
They most certainly would.
So anyway, so since I worked in the 70s, I started to write commentaries about the market and opportunities. And I have the so-called Gloom Boom and Doom Report, which is a detailed report suitable for strategists and institutions and people that have time to read, because it's quite lengthy. And then I have a monthly market letter that is also much cheaper in price, that people can also subscribe to, and they can all go to the website gloomboomdoom.com, gloomboomdoom, all in one word.com.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to encourage people to do that, Marc.
Well, it's very kind of you. I suppose that your company is a welcome addition to how you can store gold.
Absolutely.
I mean, if someone can open an account with you and store gold with you, and then withdraw the gold in any jurisdiction?
Use it as money. Absolutely. We did basically putting physical gold auditably held in the client's name on the blockchain, and simply with a debit card, you can spend that money anywhere in the world in the country of that. Obviously, you come in to a country with a debit card. The minute that you pay for goods, it's paid for in that currency. So, it's physical gold. What we've done is really put physical gold back on the blockchain, made it money again, and shared that pool auditably with everybody, and they can then share in that pool. That pool of that, obviously there's transaction fees attached to everything, and they share in that pool and get a yield. So essentially, we're creating a yield on gold where there was never a yield on gold. And that's all auditable and fully transparent. We have a transaction with, or a private partnership, a public-private partnership with Indonesian government, the only country that actually has been allowed to actually digitize physical gold.
Fantastic.
That they ensure it's there. So it's all very, very good. And we're making a lot of progress.
Yes, fantastic. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, we're enjoying it. But thank you so much for giving us your valuable time, Marc.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, and would look forward to another visit, not in 2 years, but perhaps a bit quicker next time.
Yeah, you said at the beginning that I'm the oldest, or one of the oldest gold bugs or gold proponents that you know. Yeah, because all the others have died, so we can't wait too long.
Well, we're still smiling, and I think that's important. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew Maguire and Marc Faber, for another fascinating discussion. And remember, everyone, buy physical, whether it's gold or silver, but make sure it's 1-to-1, and understand the difference between what Andy affectionately calls the casino, paper, gold, and silver markets, and the actual physical gold and silver markets. They're not the same. Don't be fooled. So there you have it. That's all we have for you today on another amazing episode of Live from the Vault. Now, please help keep spreading the word, help growing the community about this channel also by hitting that like button, hit the share button, and also subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you want to be notified in real time as each episode goes live, just click that little bell right there, and we'll do just that. And with that, we'll see you next time right here on Live from the Vault. See you then.